Hello, advanced social psychology students. The purpose of this short video is to lead the discussion of the Altay et al. Article that was published in 2021. But before I begin that, I'm going to use this opportunity to do some housekeeping. Teaching this online, I don't have regular communication with you. And it's the first time that I've used Blackboard Ultra. And so I have been providing all of you with a lot of feedback when you turn in your article summaries. And I'm not sure if you're able to see that because for a couple of the students, I was like, when you do your references, you just need to reference the author, or don't forget to include the relevance to my life section. And then I noticed the next one has the same mistake. So it's making me think maybe that you guys are not able to see the feedback that I'm leaving. And you're going to want that feedback because it will help you prepare for the Unit 1 exam that's coming up. So please, if you're not getting that feedback, if you could send me an email, marydz@cameron.edu, and then I'll cut and paste it into an email. Also, for these harmonized discussions, for the article that you summarize and submit, that's the discussion that you need to participate in, and you need to have 2 video posts to get the full 10 points. Several of you were doing 1 video post and then a couple comments. And so that got you about 8 points. I will say many of you last week chose to comment on both or participate in the discussion on both links. So if you are participating in a discussion for the article that you did not choose to summarize, you can earn up to 3 extra credit points for doing that. I think there's some confusion because in Blackboard, there is no way for me to say, this is out of 0 points, it's extra credit, but for this student, it's out of 10 points because that's the one that they chose to summarize. So no matter what, Blackboard is going to act as though there's 10 points associated with each article, but that's not true. You know that you're only required to participate in the discussion of one of them. So if you participate in both, you'll get 3 points of extra credit for the one that is not the article that you submitted, and then up to 10 points for the one that you did. So, but to get the 10 points for the one that you did, you need to do 2 video posts as though we're sitting in a room all talking. You make a comment, you listen to the comments that other people made, and then you made another comment. Do you know what I mean? So I hope that's a little bit more clear. Also, one person has withdrawn from the class, and there's 2 at this point that don't seem to be participating, which makes me think that there are going to be several articles that are unclaimed where there won't be anyone to lead the article discussion. So for example, this week, no one chose the Altay et al. Article, and so that's why I'm going to lead the discussion. But if it keeps going like this, I'll be leading a discussion every single week, and I don't really want to do that. I don't think any of us do. So I can offer for extra credit for you guys to do in pairs or triplets, groups of 4, however you want to do it, lead some of these discussions. Or the other way we could go is to, when there's only one person that's asked to be the lead for that week, we have everyone read that same article. And I'm really open to either one. I love the idea of having students be able to choose an article, and if they don't like it, they're not stuck to it. I think there's some real benefit to that. But then by the same token, like this week and last week, everyone chose one article except for 2 people. The lead and one other person chose the second article. And so it's in this last week, lots of people participated in both, so it worked. but that's going to become problematic if, we don't have a lot of people earning extra credit that way. So I am open to both. If you want to shoot me an email and let me know what you prefer, or when you're doing the discussion this week, feel free to add at the end, oh, by the way, I would like to, if anyone else wants to, I'll volunteer for extra credit to lead this article. Who wants to do it with me? The articles that are free, that don't have anyone for them at this point, are after the exam. It's module 7, the article by Whitcower, Kang, Bucci, McLean, and Tracy from 2025. And that's going to be over, it begins before spring break and then ends a couple days after spring break. Also for module 8, no one has claimed either article, the Gurzib, Dolinsky, and Cantanera, or the Prade and Saraglo. I will say I already have a PowerPoint presentation for the Prade and Saraglo, but if you guys want to do it for extra credit, go for it. Also, and I think that's it for definite ones that no one has asked for at this point. However, there's going to be, I think 2 students really haven't participated at all. So I think there's going to be another 2 after that. So anyway, let me know what you're thinking for that. Okay, now let's get into the Altay article. Let me call up the PowerPoint presentation. And because all but 2 of you in the class chose to do this article, and you guys did a really good job. I graded them yesterday, and oh my goodness, was I impressed. So I'm going to go through this without a whole bunch of detail, just because I think you guys really know what you're doing here. So, whoops, I went too fast there, but the problem. So this article was published in 2021. The research was done during the pandemic, and this particular study was done in France. And the problem was that people were hesitant to take the COVID-19 vaccine, and medical professionals were saying, like, to everyone, if you remember back then, that a certain percentage of the population needed to get vaccinated in order for the vaccines to really work for everyone. So we'd have that herd, whatever it's called. And so the problem was, how do we get people to be more positive toward taking the vaccine? What can we do to increase their attitude, make it more positive toward the vaccine? And then what can we do to increase their intention to take the vaccine? Okay. And one thing that you need to know that I think was in it's been in the textbooks either this week or last week, that when people are provided with information, especially information that they don't already agree in, what we tend to do is we create counter arguments like, well, that's not really true. Well, I don't believe that. And so when you're given information that's trying to persuade you to do a certain thing, if you don't initially agree with it, sometimes it has a backfiring effect, and you actually are less likely to believe what they're trying to get you to believe. You become like more solid in your doubts than you were before you saw it. So they have to be really careful here as you're trying to make people's attitudes to be more positive. If you just provide them with information, if they aren't already positive, they're likely to become more negative, and it'll backfire on you. So what are they going to do? So what they decided to do was to see if a chatbot could be useful here. And so they had basically used a form of AI. It was just a chatbot that provided information about the vaccines, that had a bunch of different like links where it would debunk myths. So if you believed in this myth, if you clicked on it, it would tell you why that's not true. It also addressed a lot of counter arguments. And so if you were like, yeah, but I don't think it's a good idea because of this, well, there'd be a link. Are you hesitant because of this? And if you click it, it would give you lots of information about why the counter argument was wrong. And so basically the purpose of Altay et al.'s 2021 study was to explore if this chatbot that provided information, debunked myths, and addressed counter arguments could change people's attitudes toward the COVID-19 vaccine and increase their intention to get vaccinated. So, so what they did is, the hypothesis was that people's positive attitudes toward COVID-19 vaccines and their intentions to get vaccinated would increase after they interacted with this chatbot. And the amount of time that they spent interacting with the chatbot would mediate this relationship. So if they spent hardly any time with the chatbot, then there'd be very little attitude change. But if they spent a lot of time with the chatbot, then there'd be more attitude change. So this was the method. Very, very simple. Not easy to do, but conceptually very simple. They had people initially complete a survey. It's all through MTurk. And they asked them what their attitude toward the COVID-19 vaccine was, asked them their intention to get vaccinated. They asked them a whole bunch of other things too, like their trust in medicine and their information-seeking behavior and some other things. Then they were randomly assigned to either interact with the chatbot for as long as they wanted, or to read a brief text that explained the way that vaccines worked. And when I say brief, it only had 93 words, so very, very short. So they were either going to interact with the chatbot or they were in the control condition. After they were finished with that treatment, so after they read the pamphlet, the 93-word pamphlet that talked about how vaccines worked, or after they interacted with the chatbot for as long as they wanted, then they completed a survey again that once again asked them their attitude toward COVID-19 vaccine, asked them again the intention to get vaccinated, also asked them a bunch of other questions like, do you think you would, how much time did they think, if they were in the chatbot condition, how much time did they spend interacting with the chatbot? Their trust in government, I think that was to everyone. Their interpersonal trust, that was to everyone. If they were with the chatbot, how intuitive they thought the chatbot was, how pleasant it was, how frustrating. Was the information it presented too simple or too difficult, too complicated? Did they have any unanswered questions? And if they did, they could write those questions in there. So they were asked a whole, and also they also were told, how many people do you think you'll try to convince to use or to get vaccinated? And then they contacted the people 1 to 2 weeks later and gave them the survey again. And the survey again asked about their attitude toward COVID-19 vaccine and their intention to get vaccinated. It also asked them how many people they did try to convince to take the COVID-19 vaccine. So, and remember, this was all done in France. So the independent variables were the treatment condition. You were either in the chatbot condition or the control condition. And then the time you got, and this you were involved in all 3 time slots. They measured your initial attitudes after the treatment. In other words, after you interacted with the chatbot or after you read the pamphlet in the control group, and then 1 to 2 weeks later. Now, there were a bunch of dependent variables, but the key ones, the only ones that I'm going to mention, are their attitude toward the COVID-19 vaccines and the intention to get vaccinated. 2 other key ones, for those in the chatbot conditions, the actual amount of time they interacted with the chatbot. Because remember, one of the hypotheses is that the more time that they spent with the chatbot, the more attitude change there would be if they were in the chatbot condition. Also, that 1 to 2 weeks later, the estimate of how many people they tried to convince to take the vaccine, that had some interesting results. So I'm going to mention that. So the results, key results, people who interacted with the chatbot more than those who were in the control condition developed a more positive attitude toward the COVID-19 vaccine, especially those who had a strong negative attitude toward the vaccines initially. Also, people who interacted with the chatbot more than those in the control condition indicated that they were more likely to take the vaccine. Again, especially those who had little intention of taking the vaccine. 1 to 2 weeks later, however, participants in both the treatment conditions had more positive attitudes, but they didn't differ from one another. So initially, you were either positive or negative or whatever. If you then were with the chatbot, after the chatbot, you were more positive. And you were especially more positive if initially your initial attitude was very negative. But then 1 to 2 weeks later, we can't tell a difference between those in the chatbot condition and those who just got the pamphlet. However, both groups were way more positive. And there was some speculation in the article. The author said maybe because there was such a marketing campaign during that 1 to 2 weeks that had nothing to do with this experiment, that could have done it. Also, and this is pretty key, the more time the participant interacted with the chatbot, the more their attitude changed and it became more positive. So that was good, but that was not related to their actual intention to get the vaccine, which did increase, but it wasn't based on how much time they spent interacting with the chatbot. So the conclusion was that interacting with a chatbot changed people's attitudes and intentions to get vaccinated, especially among people with strong negative attitudes. So it kind of seems like a chatbot might be useful in the future. Some of the limitations in the study, well, we don't, like the authors were very free. We don't know what about the chatbot caused the changes in attitudes and in the attitudes toward COVID vaccines or the intention to get the COVID vaccine. Why did it work? We really don't know. Also, generalizability. Would these results generalize to other dependent variables, to other countries than France, and to perhaps other AI? Like not just a chatbot, but now we've got more sophisticated AI than they did in 2021 when this was published. So would that work even better? And you guys came up with some really great discussion questions. One was like, how effective would chatbots be long-term? Because even 1 to 2 weeks later, it didn't have an effect. What would happen if you waited 2 or 3 weeks later, a month later, would have an effect? And then many of you talked about how could the chatbots be helpful in other areas, like managing eating disorders or learning healthy habits, or for controversial topics, or for other sensitive topics. And so I am really excited this week to see how this discussion unfolds. I'm really excited to hear your ideas of how a chatbot might be used to change people's attitudes toward all different things. And so I look forward to this week when we're going to talk about this. So feel free to email me if you have any questions, or you can pop the questions in the discussion of this article if you want. All right. Thanks.